Next up, we have Kristin Urquiza and Mary Bausch-Jerkin, who will be speaking about public health and memorialization. Kristin is the nation's top disaster equity advocate with expertise in race, economic, environmental, and health policy. An experienced grassroots organizer, Urquiza co-founded Marked by COVID and catalyzed the nation's foremost community-led COVID justice movement days after the death of her father, Mark Urquiza, to COVID in June 2020. By uplifting impacted voices, Urquiza improved the nation's COVID response and advanced legislation for a just recovery, recognition, and pandemic prevention. Over the last 20 years, she has transformed global power dynamics to put power back in the hands of people. At former Congressman Harry Waxman's Mighty Earth, Angela Glover Blackwell's Policy Link, California's leading environmental justice organization, Communities for a Better Environment, and USPIRG. Urquiza holds a BA from Yale University and an MPA from UC Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy. And she is the recipient of the Arizona Public Health Association's 2021 Community Partner Award and the Goldman School's inaugural Alumni Award for Social Justice Impact. Mary Bausch-Jerkin is the Global Medical Affairs Lead for COVID-19 at Moderna. She has been with the company since the rollout of the COVID vaccine in January of 2021. She holds a PhD in cellular biology from the Medical College of Wisconsin, as well as a master's degree in clinical and translational science. Before joining industry, she ran the translational research program for the Division of Clinical Immunology at Children's Hospital and the Medical College of Wisconsin. Please welcome Kristin and Mary.
As Sarah shared, I'm Kristin Urquiza. I'm the co-founder of Marked by COVID. And before I get into sharing today about the National COVID Memorial, I just want to say a few thank yous. First of all, to the folks at MSU, to Natalie. Without you all, we would not be here today. So thank you so much for continuing to extend this incredible exhibit to be able to make space for Marked by COVID after we met one another. I have to thank the folks at Harvard, Countway, Meredith, Yasmina, and beyond, Craig, Sarah, you all. We sat down originally, Sarah and I, with another colleague from MSU and had this dream and then worked with some incredible folks to make it happen. I want to thank Mary from Moderna, Sarah, and others for believing in this grassroots movement to commemorate and memorialize who we've lost to COVID, not just only for the critical need to recognize our losses, but also how it really signifies a need to continue to advance research, science, next generation vaccines, and beyond. So thank you so much for being here today. And finally, I would not be standing here if it wasn't for two very important people, three actually in the room. One, DJ, Boston local who lost his mom, Florcy, to COVID in May of 2020. DJ so bravely shared with me and is featured in our memorial, which I hope you all see on display today. His testimonial to his mother says, quote, "It is hard to wonder if my mother, Florcy, would be here today had there not been so many times where she was not taken seriously by medical professionals, government officials, and law enforcement." I'd also like to thank Ryan Pukos, the lead of Marked by COVID, my best friend for more than 20 years, on our board of directors. On March 16th, 2020, I text messaged Ryan, so, quote, quote, ... here we are in a pandemic. First, I hope you and your wife Karen and your families are safe and doing well. Of course, let me know if Karen's parents, who live actually close to me in San Francisco, are in need of anything. Second, well, ... So this is going to change our lives forever. What are you thinking? And finally, Christine Keeves, my partner and co-founder of Marked by COVID, who has been the best person that in my life, and I'm so very grateful to have you as a co-founder of this project, but also as my life partner. Kristin Keeves was the person who, at 8:30 p.m. on June 30th, 2020, pulled over on the I-5 freeway so that I could take the phone call that my dad was dying before we could actually make it back to Phoenix to be with him. So thank you for that, and for everything that you've done to make sure that not only the memory of my father, but the memory of so many people who we've lost to COVID remain in the public domain, and that we ensure that something like this never happens again. So now I'm going to pull myself together and tell you a little bit about the work that we've been up to for the last almost 5 years. Marked by COVID is the COVID-19 Justice and Remembrance movement led by COVID grievers. We were founded in July 2020 following the death of Mark Urquiza, my dad. And our primary goal is to ensure that the people who died from COVID, many behind closed doors, people continue to die today, this week, and many who will never be counted as COVID deaths, are formally recognized in a national COVID memorial. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has transformed life as we know it. But with more than 1 million deaths in the United States alone, we hear no battle cry to never forget. And even as the Omicron wave, the largest recorded wave during the entire acute crisis that resulted in thousands of deaths a week, was peaking in January of 2022, we observed how the dominant national discourse on both sides of the political aisle was already focused on moving on. Now, to us, it is inconceivable to move on without a reckoning with the sheer volume of death, nor the unevenness of the pandemic and the conditions that made marginalized communities, disabled, elderly, low-wage workers in non-remote positions, Black, Indigenous, and Latinx folks so vulnerable in the first place. And we believe that elevating the stories of those most impacted and counting every single individual lost to COVID is the necessary first step in recognizing the legacy of structural racism in the national imagination. Now, the fundamental premise of Marked by COVID's memorial work is that we must recognize our collective and individual pain and sacrifices to properly heal and build resilience towards future disasters. Now, only societies that acknowledge their past failures can build resilient systems to prevent future ones. Or in other words, we cannot fix what we do not see as broken. Now, the number of lives lost in the COVID pandemic was already considered as incalculable by the New York Times as we neared 100,000 deaths in May 2020, just 1 month before my dad died. And as a nation, we went on to reach and quickly surpass what reporters called grim milestones: 200,000, 500,000, 1 million and counting to this day. The magnitude of loss seems impossible to convey. Within our current traditions, we need something new. The scale is already immense, and the accumulation of losses ongoing, challenging us to think about how to commemorate something that is still in progress. So bringing to the forefront of public discourse the pandemic's most severe impacts, and to be blunt, death, is essential, not only for healing, but also for ensuring that history is told inclusively and more accurately. The history of the pandemic is being written right now, and cultural forms of commemoration, commemorative practice, have always played an important role in determining whose lives and losses enter the national consciousness, enter history books, and the historical narrative of the pandemic. And so my question to all of us here today is, will we only remember the pandemic as the time we couldn't find yeast, or the time that we were on Zoom? This is a Google search of images related to COVID and the pandemic done in early 2021, which resembles, in my mind, sort of a kind of idealized Instagram feed? Or will we dare to remember that thousands of families, like mine, like DJ's, couldn't access tests, ventilators, basic medical needs, or worse, were forced to say goodbye over FaceTime to loved ones who were forced to go back to work without proper PPE, forced to go back to normal before we had the tools to keep one another safe. And this is me and my dad in one of our final quote-unquote conversations when he was in the ICU. So by centering the voices of those most impacted and setting out to count every single person lost to COVID, we are demanding that the worst outcomes and consequences of the US pandemic response not be left to the shadows. And we are also, too, advocating for the national story to represent the full range of lived experiences and not skew towards those with the conditions, the resources, or the privilege to be able to share their stories. And myself here, despite having a master's in public policy from UC Berkeley that focuses on equity, I didn't actually realize until my dad died that inequities don't stop at death. They continue at legacy. Obituaries are costly and are part of a broader system of gatekeeping and grief. There is a literal cost of mourning. The price tags for traditional markers like burial plots, individualized headstones, and beyond keep people away from public recognition. So with the National COVID Memorial, we are working to stop inequity at legacy. And while I cannot bring my dad back, nor Florcy, or the more than a million others, I can damn well make sure that history accurately tells the story of how and why he and so many others in the US have died. And so the National COVID Memorial, which is on display here, thank you again to the folks at Countway and MSU, is an involving tribute to those we have lost to COVID-19. It is conceived and created by individuals who personally lost loved ones to the pandemic, and marked by COVID's memorials centers on those we lost, ensuring a space for a collective memory for each and every one. By refusing to obfuscate the harsh realities of the pandemic, we confront the truth of what it means to lose over 1 million lives in less than 4 years and counting. This was conceived in early 2021 when we assembled a network of COVID-bereaved individuals. DJ was part of this, advocating for both stronger public health measures and the recognition of those lost. As the pandemic continued and continues, it became clear that traditional memorials could not adequately reflect the scale of the loss. Just a sort of little bit of math for you all here, we have lost over 1 million folks in less than 4 years for COVID, and over 40 years of HIV/AIDS, we've lost 700,000 folks. Just gives you a sense of the difference in scale. So it became clear that traditional memorials and even things like the AIDS Memorial Quilt cannot adequately reflect the scale of the loss, leading to the idea of creating a national memorial that would center individual stories and experiences. And through a 2-year-long iterative design process with workshops and hundreds of community meetings and feedback from bereaved activists and community members, the memorial grew into a grassroots project with the capacity to operate on a national scale. And despite what we don't read in newspapers today, hundreds of people continue to die from COVID every week, making it a top 10 cause of death in the United States still. And while the majority of us may be able to operate in a normal, COVID is not over. There's an urgent need to invest in vaccine efforts, additional research for treatments and developments of new drugs, as well as deal with the myriad of additional consequences from the pandemic that are rarely talked about, such as treatments for the millions suffering from long COVID, or supporting the more than 350,000 children who have been orphaned by COVID-19. So our efforts have resulted in a memorial that goes beyond traditional forms of commemoration. It is both a physical and digital space that invites ongoing participation, providing a platform for those who've lost loved ones to continually add to the archive. The memorial becomes a living, dynamic tribute to those lost to COVID, driven by the community and designed to ensure that no one's story is forgotten or erased. The memorial honors individuals by name. It includes its faces, birth and death dates, and personal remembrances, rejecting generic representations of loss. To accomplish the scale of more than 1 million remembrances and counting, we developed a hybrid model, a digital memorial intertwined with physical elements anchored by the concept of using augmented reality, AR, to create an evolving and interactive experience that continues to accept submissions. And by continually growing and adapting, the memorial not only documents the ongoing crisis, but challenges the erasure of its national significance. Now, this hybrid model ensures physical gathering spaces where bereaved individuals and others of the public can gather, share stories, leave behind objects, and develop communal rituals around grieving a global pandemic. And each testimonial has a photo that adds to the historical record, ensuring that the personal dimensions of the pandemic remain central to our collective understanding. And by showcasing the real lived experiences of those who lost loved ones, the memorial challenges the tendency to trivialize or minimize the pandemic's impact, insisting instead on a more honest reckoning. It also highlights the deeply personal and varied responses to the pandemic, from grief and depression to anger and hope, offering a platform for remembrances that evolve as the pandemic continues to shape lives. This mutability, supported by the memorial's digital and augmented reality format, allows for continual updates, making space for new memories and ongoing losses. And it provides grievers, as well as all of us, the opportunity to be heard, and in turn, a deeper opportunity for healing. In this particular memorial, I want to read to you, during my dad's Zoom funeral service, I had to use my mother's iPad to broadcast the service to our friends and family. My last image of my father was captured using iPhone FaceTime video as the staff at the veterans home wheeled him to the window so that I could join my sister and brother to say our farewell prayers. Jeffrey Mills, Donald Mills' son, shared this with us. Now, memorials in general, they serve as visual communication of community grief, and historically have created a bridge between bereaved communities and those less directly impacted by disaster. And memorials have a unique power to democratize grief by bridging the gap between stories that would otherwise be left out and those who have the resources to publicly mourn. Genevieve Martinez, who you see here, was a registered nurse in El Paso, Texas. Her daughter Caitlin shares, quote, "We deserve an apology. We deserve to be heard. It never ends. It feels like new losses every single day, new grief, new hurt." The National COVID Memorial is also customizable to the space, as it has been over the last several years. And as customized here to Countway Library, in which when you go down to the bottom floor, the staircase and our memorial pedestal serve as the marker in which, when you use your smartphone or tablet, can activate this incredible memorial vortex. Here, what you're seeing up on the slide projection is an installation we did at the Elmhurst Hospital in Queens, New York, which some may remember was one of the hardest hit communities early on in the pandemic. It was the first place in which had refrigerated trucks. And what you're seeing is a remembrance of Isabel, whose daughter, Fiona Tulip, a very close friend of mine now, one of our first activists, submitted this very simple yet powerful remembrance of her mother, who delayed her own retirement to continue working in the hospital, to say, quote, "She was a hero." As I mentioned a moment ago, using a smartphone or tablet and the Snapchat application, visitors scan a snap code, which is similar to a QR code that allows you to enter the Marked by COVID AR experience. And from your actual device, you are then able to visit with the individual remembrances all submitted by loved ones. And you can see here a picture of me, Sarah Sank, and the governor of Arizona, Katie Hobbs, with the memorial in an installation in Phoenix, Arizona, in 2023. Our memorial also allows for submissions in whatever language is accessible to the user, allowing for people to communicate with the broader public in their most accessible language. And you see a memorial here for Shamora Martinez in a moment in which her loved one submitted in the language most accessible to them, Spanish. And this is in conjunction with a memorial altar in Tucson, Arizona. Memorials, particularly those created or supported by the state or other major institutions, signal to all of us what we should consider to remember and also what we should consider to work on. They name what is worthy of our collective attention, our focus, policy, as well as our grief. So most urgently, the National COVID Memorial confronts the pervasive lack of recognition of the pandemic as a disaster at all. Ultimately, the entire nation, all of us, deserves a memorial that is truly commensurate with the scale of this disaster. And this means not only a continued development of our AR lens in public spaces and spots all across the country to create a vast, accessible digital archive, but also the establishment of a permanent memorial in every single state, but also physical monuments, a physical monument with a prominent position in our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. This would be a tangible space of reflection, mourning, and healing essential to ensuring that the staggering loss from this pandemic is properly memorialized and never forgotten. Thank you.